Welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. I am Francis Lombard. In this episode, I first have a one-on-one conversation with Morgan Rosenblum, managing editor and art director of Heavy Metal magazine. Then for the last part, Jonny Handler, Morgan's writing and business partner, joins us to talk about their series Stable from Heavy Metal and Winds of Numa Sera from Dark Horse. A reminder, I've been conducting interviews since 2017, and you can find the earlier ones on the Portrait of an Editor Patreon page. It's just $1 a month to join. Now here's my conversation with Morgan Rosenblum. Enjoy. Morgan, welcome to Portrait of an Editor. The first question I want to ask, and this is already going to have us bouncing all over the place, but how was WonderCon?
It was great. I haven't done a con since, I would say, before the pandemic. I used to do a lot, I did like the Comic-Con circuits from New York Comic-Con to C2E2 to Fan Expo in Canada. It was great. WonderCon was awesome. It was just great to be around fans of all things sci-fi, fantasy, comic. It's fun when you can be like, it's going like a concert, when you're around people that like the same things you do, and aren't afraid to show it. If anything, they're like excited to show it off and really get into it. I love cosplay. Not so much dressing up myself. I do like dressing up, but I like seeing it a lot. And it's just great to talk with convention goers and fans and find out what they're reading, what they're into, what's piquing their interests.
I just find like at a con, and I've talked to every so often we talk about this, of just the energy there. I have a big smile most of the time. It's just, I don't know, it's a great experience, and just the energy and the enthusiasm and just the passion and just there's a whole group of people there that like this, everybody's just into something similar, the same thing or whatever. So was that there? I mean, it wasn't dampened anything by mask wearing or anything or COVID. No, it was back.
Yeah, it seemed, for me, it felt very much back. Like, I think all booth goers were required to wear masks and stuff, but I don't believe that the anyone, like all the fans were just like what do you call like a convention goer? Is there like
fans? I don't know.
Yeah, like
attendees.
The attendees, I guess. They weren't required to, so they got to show off their masks. You could see a lot of their smiles. I mean, some of them were obviously wearing it. A good chunk of them, I would say, were, but it felt. I mean, people were ready to interact, and it felt pretty normal to me. I was wearing the mask the whole time, which is fine. But I'm also a very outgoing person, and so not that it's like part of my role at Heavy Metal, but I like, working the booth almost like as a salesman to a degree. And like, I have like a whole system where like when someone walks by, I'm like, what's up? How's it going? Or how are you enjoying the con? Just to engage with them, as opposed to just being like, hey, do you want to see what I have to show you? I just start talking to them. I'll comment on like their outfit, or I usually ask them like, hey, have you checked out is there any booth I should go check out when I get my break? Because I can't just go and explore the whole thing. That, I'll have only a limited time. What do I have to check out? And then based on their response, if they're like, oh, the Star Wars lightsaber booth, I'm like, oh, cool. And then they probably like sci-fi. So I'm like, oh, you like sci-fi? Do you know about Heavy Metal? We got a really cool sci-fi story that just came out. And I'm like, show them that. So based on their answer, it's like a kind of a natural progression into, let me tell you about what the cool stuff we're working on.
I mean, as a managing editor and art director, now that cons are back, what's your objective when you go to the con? Because you're there to work.
Well, I usually, it's to interact, I would say, more than anything else, to get the word out about, about Heavy Metal. Because a lot of people, that I would say like 30 years and older are familiar, even probably 40 years and older are familiar with Heavy Metal just because it's been around for a while. But the younger generation, they're like, what? You mean the music genre? And we're like, no. So it's a combination of interacting with established, diehards, and then also bringing on new viewership, new readers. The overall goal, but we speak on panels and things like that about, like, I'm also a writer as well, so I have several titles with Heavy Metal that are coming out. One just came out called Stable, which is doing really well, and so we did a panel there to promote the book and just kind of talk about the creation process of it, and all 4 of the creators on the team were involved.
Did you go in with, as a managing editor or art director, trying to find art director? Are you looking for artists? Are you trying to engage?
Yeah, that's always a thing.
Have you set up meetings, or are you sort of just winging it? Or are there people that that you haven't had a chance to contact that you're hoping maybe you'll run into the show? Are you out there on the floor just sort of shaking hands with creators and trying to, get phone numbers or talk about scheduling or the availability, where heavy metal's going, just pitch that as a publisher? Or is that sort of what kind, what kind of prep do you do before going in? And then, do you have an agenda, or do you just sort of see where the tide takes you?
Well, as far as like being present to receive a submission or talk with potential creators, the internet is a beautiful tool for that. So I don't need to physically be, in front of someone and setting up a meeting. Like it wouldn't preclude someone from coming to me via like through email or even social media. I get that some people are like, I have a new book I want to submit. Are you receiving submissions? I'd be like, sure, send it over. Heavy metal is always pretty much looking for new stuff. That's like what we pride ourselves on, is like trying to find the diamonds in the rough, right? And break talent, meaning like break them into the industry. So it doesn't need to, I don't go to Comic-Con, to answer your question specifically, like I don't go into Comic-Con trying to set up meetings per se, unless, for example, like I know ahead of time that like the contact that I've already probably made is going to be there, or someone like asked me directly. But as far as like scouting and recruiting goes, whether it's trying to find new artists or new writers, in a lot of cases, I always go by Artist Alley, right? Every time, just to see like in person, but for the most part, like I use like ArtStation and like Instagram and people's personal portfolio. Like when you follow someone on it, even on Instagram, this is just kind of how the algorithm's built, I guess. It'll show you others with similar kind of content. And then I usually just click on the bottoms of a few of them just to see. And sometimes it's like, super famous artists. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know this person, or they're under contract with Marvel exclusively or whatever. But then, I'll be like, oh, who's this? And then I have like a little group with some of the other editors where I'll forward it to them and say, what do you guys think of this guy? And it's not even like, I don't even know if they're available or anything like that. It's just like, I just came across this talent. What do you think? And then if people are like, oh, yes, that's awesome. At that point, I'll reach out and be like, hey, just wanted to check in on your availabilities. I'm the managing editor at Heavy Metal. Love your stuff. Maybe we can find a way to collaborate or get on a project together. And then if they have a manager, they'll loop me in. And if they're kind of flying, representing themselves, they'll just talk to me about that. So that's generally the process.
Mm-hmm. How was Artist Alley for WonderCon this year?
It was great. There was like two that I think we're talking to now that we found there as like potential artists for an upcoming.
Was it a decent size? Was it? It was just.
Yeah, we're just very selective. It was. I would say there's like, I don't know, maybe 80 different Artist Alley booths. I'm just throwing that number out there. And like they used to have that like game where it's like count the jelly or guess the jelly number of jelly beans in like the jar. I was terrible. Yeah. So I could watch it be like 10 or like 400. I have no idea. I would say.
I'm always comparing, like, I've always been impressed. I took some time off of going to New York Comic Con, but New York Comic Con always does a great job with their Artist Alley and where they place it and how they just really make it easy to get around. So for me, maybe because of my limited experience over the last couple of years, if that's the one con I go to, I always wonder how it compares, because it really seems, we're talking with artists in there and then also editors who have to, go down there and try to, and try to engage and get some time with people, that it seems to be like they've done a great job and they maintain it, even though the Javits Center's been rebuilt for it's been the last 10 years, they've been rebuilding it or something. So it gets moved around. But I was just wondering, how WonderCon handles it, how people sometimes talk about where San Diego, the status of Artist Alley at San Diego too. And I was just wondering, with cons starting up again and coming out of COVID, how or, what's the status of Artist Alley throughout the world? I guess is my wonder right now.
Well, I can only speak to the specific cons I've been exposed to, because I haven't done, like I said, like I haven't done a huge tour.
Mm-hmm.
Like around the globe, or let alone the nation, in a little while. But New York in particular, I feel like they used to my memory, they would put Artist Alley like off to the right wing, like all the way over. So it was like actually separate. So you'd actually have to go through this long hallway that was separate from all the major, more commercial stuff. And that's when you got into like the niche artists only Artist Alley, which kind of felt cool. So I hear what you're saying with that. In WonderCon, contrastly, it was like kind of mixed in. I mean, it was focused, like there were several aisles that were all just Artist Alley, but it was still like in the same gigantic room or space, right, that the whole convention center was. You didn't have to like go down like a secret hallway or anything like that to get there.
I guess I should step back a little. You're managing editor and art director for Heavy Metal magazine. So in other publishers, that's two different people. what are your duties? Because it's probably a lot, because what it is, probably over a year ago, Heavy Metal magazine itself went monthly. So there's even more work there. And I was talking to Joe Illich about that, and especially doing an anthology book, there's a lot of extra work that comes with 144 pages or so of anthology, and also the publishing of of series too. So what are your duties, I guess, at Heavy Metal nowadays,
So
with those two huge titles?
There's two separate roles. I'll do the managing. I mean, I'll do the art director first, because that was the one you just asked me about.
Yeah.
Art direction is kind of what it sounds like. I'm directing artwork in a lot of cases, primarily on anything from covers. So this is kind of fun. One of the things I get to do is actually kind of come up with the story ideas for certain covers, rather than just being like, let's do a pinup of one character that's just kind of like a poster thing. It'll some of the covers that you'll see have like actual stories to it. It looks like a scene out of something.
Uh-huh.
So I'll write out a bunch of different concepts. Like, okay, I imagine a dragon in the foreground, and then like several horses, like all kind of like grouped together through some sort of contraption, like a harness is like dragging the snow away from the camera. Its jaws like broken and its tongue is slack, out of it. And we see in the distance, like there's like some ruined castle, like across some like narrow drawbridge. So, and then there's like some sort of dragon slayer leading those horses to that. Right. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And so when, in some cases I mock that cover up, like I'll do the layouts for it, and then I'll create several of these and then try to find the right artist to execute each of those type of covers. Something else might be like, if we know we wanted to do a cover specific to a specific series that we're doing, like IP or story. So rather than, what's another good one? We have a new series or we had this one thing called Black Ruins of Eremer. And it's based off of a Wonderwork podcast that we did, which is all audio. So there's zero visuals. So I had to try to craft what that scene we wanted to showcase for the cover would be. And that was like one of the most popular covers that we printed recently, and really was received well by Kai Carpenter. And he even told me, like, when I would work with him, he's like, you're so specific with your vision. It's great, because the artist still gets to do all the leg, work on it and really craft like the design of the armor and like what the weapons look like and all that fun stuff. But it gives them a clear vision as to what to do. Because this is kind of interesting. When I first came on at wanting to do that kind of stuff in the art direction, at the time, Matt, who's my boss and a good friend, he's also my partner in Hero Projects, was just kind of like, just let them do what they want and just kind of like edit it based off that. And so we brought on an artist, and they're like, what do I do? What do you want? And Matt was like, just tell them they could do anything. And I was like, okay, what you pitch me, what do you want? And they're like, I'd really appreciate a little direction. Like, I don't, like, I can come up with some stuff, but like, you want like a mermaid cover? Do you want to whatever? So I was like, cool. I have this whole little book that I can kind of like a little worksheet that I came up with some ideas. What do you think? I sent it to him. And he's like, oh, this is great. This is like a whole, like, I can choose all these other ones. This one speaks to me and this one speaks to me, which is kind of fun. So fast forward now, I'm doing like a good chunk of the covers for art direction. And then also a bunch of the stories that I edit, I generally will rework a lot of the layouts with the artists. Because as I'm reading the scripts that I get, it's very specific, but I also think I've been told by artists that I have a very good eye and sort of vision for how certain stories should be told cinematically. So if I look at a page and I notice that, I'm like, we're using the same camera angle a lot here, let's change the perspective, especially in like scenes that maybe talk heavy. You don't want to have just like talking heads, right? So you'd want to have, maybe place the camera, right? The camera is you, the viewer, like sort of like pull it back so that you're actually watching it from like a low angle. And it just kind of makes the story a little bit more interesting. So things like that for the art direction side.
Probably discovered that maybe it's easier to provide limitations, to provide sort of a direction or sort of boundaries for the artist, and you probably get delivered something a little more than instead of like, go, hey, just do whatever you want to do, because then it's like too many choices. The whole thing about why are there only like 6 color choices for a car, because if you had 10, the buyer would never know which one they really wanted or something. So that's why you're limited. So do you feel that
really made you realize that light bulb went on, that like if I have put the artist sort of within, I understand what they are, what they like doing, and then give them some limitations, maybe they focus in and they get the passion really kicks in.
I think this might be a good analogy. So I as a managing editor now, one of the things I do is I read scripts a lot and stuff like that. I remember reading this one. I couldn't tell you who wrote it, nor would I, because I wouldn't want to throw the person under the bus if I'm really negatively critiquing a submission. But the script was pretty. When they were describing the protagonist, they were like any age, any gender, any hair color. It was so I couldn't even envision the character in the story, because it was clear that the writer just was trying to get across to me that like this could be anyone, or you could cast a female to play this lead or a male. But because it lacked that, there was no like real personality to, like, I could not envision in my mind what the character as I'm reading the script, and immediately it sucked me out of it. And I was like, no, this isn't gonna work. It also, that like reading that even taught me a lesson, which is like, if part of what makes a writer really great is their ability to paint the picture in your mind, right?
Yes.
And I think the same thing kind of goes with art too. Like as an art director, you want to give them, like you just said, some direction, something to build towards, like something to inspire them almost, as opposed to just come up with something random and submit it to me and whatever you feel like, if that's the case, they'll just kind of doodle and sketch whatever they want, which could still be great, mind you. But in some cases, I think we also want to make it specific to some of the things that we're doing, right? So now we have like A and B covers. Usually A is like more traditional artwork that you would see throughout the years, and then the B stuff is like more specific to series and stories that we're actually putting out there. So that it'll be like a truly painted scene or something like that from one of our stories, like Tarna or like Star Wars or something like that, or Ram God, whatever it may be.
Well, you also have deadlines and so a deadline on top of like some direction probably makes it easier for everybody, instead of, because if you guys are doing at least 2 covers a month, sometimes 4, I think.
Depending on if there's like an extra variant or something like that.
You still have
covers is like the thing that I worry about the least.
Oh, okay.
Because it's just one piece as opposed to like an ongoing serial from the same artist. We can schedule out our cover artists well in advance, and we do.
How far out?
I mean, I've done it where it's like 6 months in advance in some cases, but we've also done it where like, we had booked the artist for something closer to, and then they had a pushback slate. So then it gets a little dangerously close. Like, oh, are we going to finish this cover in time? But covers usually allow us to, they can be moved and kind of things. The harder thing, and this is also one of my responsibilities as managing editor, is making sure that the sequential work, right, the actual story content, the interiors, that those are finished. And because those are generally done monthly, right? So in the past, heavy metal was 99.9% all one and done anthologies. It was like new story, move on. Now what we've been trying to do, and I think it's actually really helped with our brand's resurgence and like just the magazine sort of making a comeback, is we're identifying certain stories that are really powerful and that fans and readers are gravitating towards or have gravitated to, like Tarna, for instance, that was turned into a series, right? So we kept coming back to it, and it's got like the long form overarching narrative, but then it also has, they're structured in a way that you can read, sort of like pick up at chapter 3 and not feel like, shit, I didn't see the previous one, so I'm screwed. That's been like the big thing for us, is making sure that like each episode has a self-contained aspect to it, so that if you're not familiar with the character or the storyline, by the end of that chapter, you're like, you got a full little episode where oh, cool, that was fun, adventure or whatnot. And also I want to, read more of that. And then what we do is, so like after a series runs its course, so if a serial goes from like chapter 1 through chapter 8, and over the course of like 8 different issues, following its completion of the arc for like season 1 or whatnot, we put it into a trade, which is pretty cool. So then you can read that whole trade on the side. So getting back to like the deadline aspect of that's tough, because then you're managing usually like the sequential artist, the illustrator, who's doing everything from layouts through pencils through inks. Some cases they'll do their own colors. Generally speaking, we have separate colors for that. And then you have the letter, then you have the proofreader, myself, the editor, that's kind of like one part project manager and one part story editor / art director throughout the entire process, making sure that everything is submitted in a steady fashion. I've personally found that you don't want to just like rely on an artist to just, now there are plenty of artists that can do this, no problem, like where they just kind of wait and then submit to you all at once on deadline. But in some cases, a lot of artists, they're, not the best with deadlines all the time. Again, I'm not speaking for all artists. It's just that, like, as I'm a creative person myself, so I've always found that like having, deliverable submissions at the end of every week or something like that, that sort of force me to be accountable and not just kind of like, oh, I can do double work next week or triple work the week after.
But as managing editor, that's something you set up, is that the sort of make sure there's a stage thing at the end of each week. And are you paying? Go ahead.
When I kick off a project, one of the first things I do is okay, cool, excited to have you on board. Let's quickly go over a target production schedule. I reverse engineer it. So I'm like, if this is the date we need to have it by print deadline, and I usually build in like a week buffer, at minimum or more, just in case like, a snafu happens. I'll then say, okay, based off this final date, I've organized it by week, and it'll be like, week once or Friday of this week, I need the layouts for the, first chapter 1. And then the end of next week, the following Friday is like, let's get, the pencils for pages 1 through 5. And then following week is this. So it's laid out very clearly for them. And then I ask them, I'm like, does this work for you? And because if they have a different workflow, I don't want to screw up their workflow. I'm just like, you re-edit it if I propose it. And if sometimes they're like, yeah, that works great. Or they're like, I just made some minor changes, and they'll just like adjust the dates of the pages because they spend more time in the layout phase than they do in the inking phase or something like that.
I think it's scary when, 30 days go by and you haven't heard anything from from the artist, I would think.
Yeah, no,
it's like, even though they might deliver it 30 days, like here's everything, but that's a scary 30 days.
It is really scary. And that, like, the thing is, like, you're right. Sometimes they do deliver and it's like, awesome, thanks. Whew, you gave me but then like, what's the flip side of that is the implications of if we don't, okay, so now the artist is late. They had they were scared to tell us they were sick and whatever. And we're like assuming that they had it finished or ready with that because they didn't communicate that to us. And now we don't have our pages ready for the magazine, and that affects the entire magazine because it's not just a single issue comic, right? It's magazine. So now we had 20 pages allocated for this one series. What do we do to fill that? We have to go to print with those. So now we're scrambling to move stuff. That's the sticky situation that becomes very difficult. And Joe Illidge is the king of, like, I don't know how he does it, because he has to, as a executive editor, that he's the top dog with editing. Like,
is he tracking all that too, or
there's like this master Excel sheet that like has everything broken down from like table of, like, it's the book map in there, but it has everything from like I think there's 30 issues that are planned out ahead of time that show you like, okay, this issue 315, Heavy Metal 315 has the Acts chapter 2 of 6, and it says the page count and then whatever, and then it's like these are all the serials we have. Then it shows the one-off shorts. Then if it's like editorial pieces or interviews or prose, whatever it is, it's all mapped out, page count, what number it is if it's part of the larger series. Because again, if you move one in a series, it affects all of them, right? You can't just like move one and then have 2 in one issue. I mean, you can do that, but that's not what we're trying to do.
With the one-offs, are you tracking those differently? I mean, let's say I have an 8-page that it's just going to be a one-off. Do you let the creative team sort of do their thing, or are you
same thing.
Them delivery?
It's just less, like, worst case scenario, like that's a lot easier to move without having a true domino effect, as opposed to moving one because like I said, if you move one in the serial, it's like a snake, they all need to move with it.
Yeah.
Right. And then it affects all the magazines, because not every serial is the same page count either. So it can't just be like, oh, let's just swap these 2. I don't even know if some artists necessarily realize the impact that they may have, especially in a magazine like ours, if they are like actually late on pages or something like that.
And I've always heard that from editors from doing this podcast, and I even read something about a scenario. An editor's just like, why don't you just call me? I mean, it's like, if you see there's a problem or something happens, everybody knows stuff happens. And if you just explain, have a conversation up front instead of having me, have an editor out there going, what's going on? Or, where are things? Or just delivering the bad news at the last minute so the editor can't really adjust to the, the pages are coming in late. That's the thing that really, if you have more of a, warning, you can actually work things out.
My biggest pet peeve is like when we get radio silence.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have an editorial meeting every Monday the core editorial, and then we have a larger one on Wednesday. Usually we on Monday we're like, where are we at with everything, like in your, whatever. Each manager is assigned usually to a story or several stories, series, whatnot, content, and we all report into Joe, and like, here's where we're at with our respective stuff. And then so every once in a while I'll be like, so what's going on with this? And we're like, we don't know. We haven't heard back in 2 weeks. I've reached out to him 3 different times. So then we decide, like, we escalate it. Is this probably, at this point we are getting a little bit worried. So that, it's part of the business. In other cases, like how I deal with an artist or a creative kind of going dark on me for a bit. I always try to tell them in the beginning, I'm like, look, I am here to, yes, I work for the magazine, but it's my job to keep my creative team like happy and feeling safe, and like that this is like a safe place where you guys can talk to me. So if something happens, if you're behind, tell me, guys. I mean, yeah, I might be upset, but I'm a solution focused guy. Like me just yelling at you about why you were bad on something doesn't help fix the problem. So first things first for me is like, tell me what's up so I can manage my expectations, my team's expectations, and then we can plan accordingly. I'm going to be way more mad if you wait till later, until the day of, and then tell me, because then now you're really hurting me and the whole magazine. At least if you give me a little more heads up, we can plan together. And I generally give, my artists at least like one, like, okay, shit happens. I understand that you're, whatever was going on, but you told me quickly. So that's cool. If they keep repeating that behavior, that's a bigger conversation as to like, can we rely on this artist? Because there's plenty of talented artists that we work with that just, either overcommit and underdeliver where they think they can do more, but they're scared to kind of tell you that they can't do that. I always say, like, if this is becoming overwhelming for you where you can't do it, like, just communicate. Tell me. We'll figure out a new schedule. If we have enough heads up, we can move stuff around. That's okay.
Well, I mean, in comics in general, I think the issue of overcommitting for artists is that, I mean, they don't know where the next job's coming from at times. And when you start getting people approaching you and, you work so hard to get the first job, and then if the floodgates open up, why say no? Because now you're making money and you don't want to, ruin that. So it's a weird, and maybe it's a much bigger question than heavy metal or any publisher, of just like the nature of things, the nature of freelance, just the nature of this job, of this industry, and how, people are paid, and the, I guess, lack of security that comes with being a freelancer too.
Another part of it, I would think, is that, like, hopefully I totally hear what you're saying, which is like, okay, cool. They just got contracted to do a series or a project, and now they get interest from another party that wants to do that. All they need to do, and this, this goes for any type of creative, is like, say, I'm currently working on a project, until, like, let them know. It's not going to usually turn them off. In some cases they might pass because, like, they need something to start immediately. Like, for example, if I reach out to an artist and I'm like, hey, we're looking for an artist for this new, series that we're doing. What's your availability like? And that's usually the first thing I ask. If they come to me and they say I can start right away, but they really can't start for a while, or they think they can start right away, but they wouldn't be able to, like, actually do more than like a page a week or something, like, which is really not getting us closer. I just say, like, when would you, the next thing I say is, like, in my initial outreach, it'll be, this is the project we're looking for, kind of like just simplifying it, like genre, it's a sci-fi, space odyssey or whatever that follows the little log line or whatnot. And then I'll say it's a 6-part series or 6-issue run. So we're looking at probably like, call it like 120 pages, something like that. Uh-huh. And we're looking to do about 14 to 16 pages a month, right? Do you feel like is that something that you would be able to do? Like, if you could commit, and sometimes they'll tell you yes, and then they're like, cool. And I'm like, all right, when can you start? And they're like, but not till whatever. I'm like, okay, we can then I bring that information, or I'll know maybe ahead of time, like, when does the series need to begin? Can we push the series back by 3 months so that we can secure the artist we want? In many cases, the answer is yes, right? If we really like an artist for something, and we're like, because finding the right artist is like such a difficult, it's like trying to hire a full-time position for a series. It's one thing for like a short, but when you're, uh-huh. You want to find the right person. So we might be willing to wait. The last thing we want to do is have the artist commit to a project, and then meanwhile they're already committed to something else they didn't tell us about, and now they've promised the same workload of 14 pages per week, or sorry, per month, not week. That'd be crazy. To like to two different people, and then they can't fulfill both. So they either let both down or they let one down completely and screw it over. What I would say to the artist is you can take the job, just be upfront with them and tell them like when you're free to do the next thing.
Because as an editor, your job, one thing that I've learned doing this podcast is that, you try to bring half of 90% of your job, it's like they say about directing, is casting the right people, getting the right crew together. And then if you get that and that chemistry as an editor, you feel that the chemistry that you need there and the talent you need there, then the project will sort of take care of itself in a way. So willing to wait for somebody who you feel is the right person for that series, for that, the title is not an issue really, because it's going to make it. That's sort of what it is that if you're reaching out to it.
In a lot of cases, there's some cases now. I mean, there's some cases where we might be between two artists and we're reaching out simultaneously, like just to find out, like, hey, what is your availability? Hey, what's your availability? We were like, it's not like we're trying to play one against the other. They don't even know that we're doing that. It's just so that if one says I'm not available or I can't do it at all, then we go with the other one. So I could understand where an artist is like, well, if I don't say that I'm available for another 3 months, the other guy's available. Yeah, that runs the risk. But at the end of the day, like, you don't want to. It's a small industry, and the last thing you want to do is develop a reputation that you're completely unreliable. You breach contract regularly. Like, you need to understand that, like, at the end of the day, like, we're in a pretty fun and creative field. I love being able to do this every day, but it's like, it's a business. They need to, if they can't get the pages in, like, then we can't get the magazine to print to the fans, and then people stop reading it, or vendors stop buying it. There's a business aspect to it. So
people talk, editors talk, everybody, people know where somebody might have dropped the ball, even though the public or in general they don't know. But there's talk in the industry, and it is such a small industry. So it is a sort of,
you don't even know an artist, right? That like or a creator that like constantly like hurts the publisher, like where it's to the point like where they're just not reliable. Like, I've worked with several super talented artists, and that I'm like, oh, this is some of my favorite work I've ever had, but I can't rely on the artist to deliver the pages on time, and the amount of stress that brings me and the magazine as a whole is tough. So it's like, maybe moving forward, like, we don't use this person again, or we need to pivot and try to find another artist for the series, because we can't count on this person. That's why I constantly repeat, like, communicate, just talk to us.
Before we bring in your writing partner, I wanted to maybe touch upon your origin story a bit, because when did you decide to pursue a career in comics?
I used to work, I've had several different careers and jobs throughout my life. In sales, and then fitness. I was a group fitness trainer for a while. It's something I still like to do a lot, but I don't do it anymore. I'm full-time creative now. I think at the time when I first started writing Treadwater, which is my first graphic novel, like, I don't know, 8 years ago. It's almost 10 now. Wow, that's crazy. Time flies. I was working at, I want to say, either like a medical tech company in sales or like an ad agency doing sales, and just really wanted to get into creative. Specifically at like an ad agency, I wanted to design like campaigns and stuff. But like, it's weird, because as a kid, I didn't realize that I could just be like a comic writer. I don't know why. I didn't think that was like a real job for someone. And now I'm like, I would have majored in English or in creative writing in college and pursued that from the get-go. I don't know. Maybe it was just because like there's not as much money in that or something like that, or whatever it is, the outside influences. Ultimately, I'm unhappy in my current career path and going into a 9-to-5 desk job, not being able to be creative at all. So I started writing. And not just thinking. What I think a lot of people do at first is they're like thinking about their book in the world, but not actually starting to like plan and putting hands to keys or pen to paper, And so once I started doing that, then it like became like an addiction for me, or an obsession where I couldn't stop. And all I wanted to do was write and create and do stuff. And then soon after that, like, I left my job to just kind of give this a real shot. I think I was like 26 at the time. So
now you're managing editor, art director, and also editing the stories in heavy metal. What's carried over from your previous careers?
I would say my sales ability, like just understanding how to you have to market yourself and sell your own stuff. So like when you're, especially as a writer, you'll need to learn how to like sell your stuff to a publisher or to distributor, whether that's Diamond or someone else. Like, so when you go to a publisher, in a lot of cases, you don't just want to give them like, here's my full manuscript. It's usually like, and stuff like that. And even understanding sales techniques, sort of like when you reach out is the first time, like not to, making it's like a resume, right? If someone notices a typo in your resume, they're like, that's your best, supposed to be like your first impression and something like that. If you can't catch your own typos, you either don't know that they are there, which says that you're not, particularly savvy in that regard, or you didn't have it checked properly, or you just don't care enough, which means you're either lazy or whatever. So I didn't used to get that. I get that now, which is like, really make sure it's polished. In a lot of cases, your first impression is your last impression. So what I've taken from my previous roles is definitely like sales, and then also just like project management and working with a team. I think a lot of if I was just a writer from the get-go, always working from home and never having to like go to an office or have a schedule or something like that, where I was around other people, I wouldn't have the same accountability. I wouldn't feel that as much. And then also I'm extremely organized. And I know how to use like a lot of like Google Suite, from Excel to just the whole G Drive situation. We store everything on that. We comment on, like, I pretty much got our company to start using G Drive to like add our notes to one document. So now if we're all going in a magazine, we can all put our notes on one PDF that's shared, that everyone, has, not everyone, but whoever we want to assign access to can. So those are like some technical stuff that like I pulled from my last job. But most of the creative stuff that I've learned, I've like either learned while working with other creatives, whether that's like when I started at heavy metal, I was like project manager. That's it. I wasn't even like an editor. I had to like ask to be able to sit in or almost sort of like intern in that regard, and then was given like one small project that I did pretty well on. And then it was with that like the +5 points that I got from that gave my bosses more, confidence to give me another project or a larger one. And then, it's like, oh, this guy can actually do this role, and I like to think I'm willing to learn, and that I don't know everything. I definitely don't. I'm still learning a ton from Joe Willage and David Irwin and Matt Medney and stuff. So, even my other peer editors as well. I learned from artists and creatives too, and like writers too. Every once in a while, I'm like, wow, that was really well done. I ask them too. I'm like, this is the notes that I'm thinking, but if you ever feel like I'm making the artwork worse, tell me. I'm not a dictator. Now, at the end of the day, I may disagree with you and say, I appreciate, your feedback on this, but I'm going to go with my initial decision. But I do like to have feedback from the collaborators.
The one thing about like editors, a lot of times they feel like they're underwater with all the projects they have. The things that you've set up, have you enabled to sort of avoid that, or feel that you can manage to sort of conquer chaos in a way, or and allows you to have more creative freedom with how you've been using technology and what you brought into heavy metal with your organizational skills?
Absolutely. When I got here, we didn't have really true digitals. Like the previous production designer that was with us had all of the files, all of them, on his personal like hard drive. We did not have them. So when he left, he had to ship us, like physically mail us the single copy of all of the company like archives for years. I got us going. It wasn't solely me. I was involved in the process to get the files like on like a cloud pretty much. So that, right. So that like we had access as a company to it, and that one person couldn't handicap or bootstrap, the company. We had to really just like modernize. And then the planning that Joe was here before I got here. So I don't know, not like a whole lot before I was there. I think he came on maybe like a few months before I did, but he had already started like getting it organized by the time that I got there. And having it planned out, like the magazine, being able to, like for us, just being able to jump into that same document and like see the 1,000-foot scope of like, where is this magazine? What does it look like? 10 issues down or something like that. What cover do we have assigned here? What editorial piece are we going to do? It makes it a lot less stressful because you have a much clearer idea. And you can also see the trickle down effect if we were to move something. It's like a puzzle. You can I can grab this whole tail, move this to here, but now this is creating more pages. We're like over the 144 page count. So maybe we can take 2 shorts and move those into this one. Yeah, that'll work. The shorts are great because like I said, they allow us to fill pieces and with great content without it having a major effect. So they're you were to think like Tetris, right? It's like the bigger pieces with the crazy shapes are much harder to fit, but then you get like just a little square here and there, and you're like, oh, that's easy, and that'll fill that little one. Kind of like that.
I won't even bother asking, like, do you guys take in consideration the page turns, for stories too? What are we going to see on the next page? Do you actually? I'll make that my last question. When you're doing that, do you get down to the minutia of taking advantage of page turns and telling a story? So you are considering that when you're putting the magazine together.
Sure. It creates a suspense from turning. It also can create a beat, right? Yep. Like you need a moment, like if a scene change or something like that, if you want to give, it's the equivalent of like if you were watching a movie or a show or something like that, and you wanted like a long, like a held black for a moment, just to kind of settle the pacing. The page turn does that in some cases. It also can create like a cliffhanger. Like for example, if there's a cliffhanger on the next page, you generally don't want to show that on the right side of a page. You should want to save that for the left side page for a page turn so that it doesn't spoil it in case someone's eyes jump ahead. So we definitely factor that in. In some cases, like there's we may decide to start something on like a left side page because maybe the story begins on like a panoramic 2-page spread, but that's intentional. So.
No, and also I've been catching up on some of my heavy metal, and there are some 2-page spreads that are just amazing because of the size of the magazine. It's like it's not the same on a regular comic, and I open it up and I'm like, this is why I'm reading this book every month. I mean, I might not like everything, but this moment is worth the price of admission right here, just because of this format and everything, and the scale that you get in the magazine size.
I've gotten so used to the magazine size now that when I like switch to like the standard, for anyone who doesn't know, the magazine is actually just larger pages than the comic, and they're also not just like they're not even the same proportion. So like a standard graphic novel or comic page is more narrow, whereas ours are a little bit more square-ish, like they're wider, which allows us to kind of fill up the real estate a little bit more. Visually, because if you think about how our eyes are, right, like we see wider, we don't see narrow.
At this point, Jonny Handler, Morgan's writing partner, joined us from LA to talk about their heavy metal series Stable and also their dark horse series Winds of Numa Sera. Going back to my original question of how was WonderCon, I guess at WonderCon the two of you had a panel regarding one of your new series, Stable. And I guess first, before we really get into it, what is Stable all about?
I can handle it. I usually do like the original, like the general, like quick pitch on it. It's not a super quick pitch, but it's a sci-fi post-apocalyptic thriller. I want you to imagine that a black hole sort of randomly shows up right by our sun and immediately starts sort of sapping its hydrogen, right? So now the sun is dying very quickly. Earth is going to freeze over in a matter of years at this point. We can't move to another planet, right? Because it's at least not in our solar system, because same sun, so same sort of result. So what do? We don't have hyperspace travel at this point. So a company called Astro, which is kind of the equivalent of like SpaceX and NASA, send out a bunch of satellites into the black hole with like pretty much like a mayday or distress call asking for help. In desperation, and ultimately someone answers the phone or something. Another alien race says that they've helped other planets like ours before, and they send us the architecture or the blueprints on how to build hyperspace capable arcs or ships, but they'll only host a certain amount of us. So we can pack the ships to the brim, but they can only make 3. So now humanity is tasked with deciding who gets to ride on these sort of Noah's Arks, right? The stable of arcs, stable of ships. And it's a pretty cool system that they go about, right? One is you want to bring the best, or humanity decides to, Astral sort of holds the keys because they receive the blueprints, right? So they can decide who goes. So it's like bring the best of the best doctors, best mathematicians, best writers, best actors, best musicians, just the best of us. But we also have to allow them to bring some people that they care about. So everyone gets a +2. You can bring any 2 people you want. But then it creates the Sophie's choice of what happens if you have 3 people in your family, or 4, you have 4 kids. Do you leave some behind and make that choice, or do you give up your seat altogether and then know that you're going to suffer like a doomed fate? So ultimately, the story follows two different narratives: the what we call the chosen, and then the left behind. The story begins with the arcs already on, like the people already on the arcs in space. They're heading towards the Kuiper belt, which is like the perimeter of our solar system, so that we can clear the asteroid field and then jump into hyperspace. So until we get to that point, we still have contact with Earth. And so the one storyline is the chosen, the other one is the left behind. And the left behind kind of represents, I would liken it to like The Road, if you've ever seen that movie. It even has a little Walking Dead vibe, but without the zombies. It's just grim and dark, and it's scavengers and every person for themselves back there. Meanwhile, aboard the arcs, it's all sort of like sunshine and rainbows, and everyone's excited about this new potential future that they're headed towards as they go to, meet this new alien race that's going to be hosting them, that we don't get to see until the very end of the book. And the cool thing about the story is that every single character, and there's a lot of characters, it's got an ensemble cast. Every host of characters that you meet is connected to someone on the opposite storyline. So, for example, one might be the child that was left behind from like another character, and vice versa. It's pretty interesting.
Is this an ongoing or?
It's a 3-part trilogy. We planned. The first book's finished and done. That's the one that just came out in February. It's the first of the 3, but it's a nice size book. I think it's like 134 pages or something like that.
I will say one thing. Everyone who's read it was just like, "Hey, when's the next one coming out?" And we're like, "We just delivered 4 issues for you in a graphic novel. You're gonna have to wait a little bit." But yeah, really happy with how that came out, Francis.
When is the next one coming out? Do you have an answer for that, or are you guys just like to take a breather for a moment?
We're right now working with the artist to plan out his schedule so we can start up on the next part of the series. It's going to be a little bit because it takes a little while to knock out 4 issues, and obviously the art for 4 issues. But we'll those logistics right now, basically.
I would say best case scenario, we're looking at a year, just because it's not coming out as single issues and then collected into a trade. We release it as a giant book, and as people have seen with Stable, the first one, it's more than just the story pages. Like we do this really in-depth world building where there's a bunch of like fake advertisements throughout the entire book. And they're at first you might just think they're real ads. And you're like, why is this plopped into the middle of the story? But on further review, you'd be like, oh shit, these are all fake. Like they're for things that only exist in this universe or in this world. We've been told like that's like one of people's favorite things. And it's, by the way, this little device that we do, these fake ads, is kind of like a Hero Projects original. It's something that Jonny, myself, Matt, and Pete, aka Voodoo Bones, do with all of our books. So Stable is one of, I think, 5 we have coming out in our initial, what we're calling the Hero Onyx line. The Onyx are our original stories. For context, by the way, so Jonny and myself, Matt, who's the CEO of
Heavy Metal,
he's also CEO of Hero Projects, and then Pete Voodoo Bones Russo, the 4, we call ourselves like the core 4. We started with Hero. Hero is a custom comics company an animation studio where we write and create original comic and animated series content for brands, musicians, athletes, celebrities, movie studios, you name it. And it was our early success doing that stuff that actually got Matt on Heavy Metal's radar when they were looking for a new CEO. Mm-hmm. They saw what we were doing with Hero and like, ooh, that's really cool stuff. And they met with Matt. Matt's a G. He's awesome. He's just really creative and a great businessman, and is a real visionary, honestly. Don't let him hear me say all this good stuff. Anyway, so he got nabbed or tabbed as the new CEO of Heavy Metal, but was like, I just want to be clear, I'm not stepping away from Hero. And they're like, no, you don't have to. Like, we want you to continue doing both. So we've sort of become like an unofficial sister company, I would say, right, Jonny, of Heavy Metal. So like where now we've decided to publish our original line. So where Hero started just creating content for others, now that we've kind of built up our brand, we're like, we want to now let's make the stories that we want to write for us. And Stable is 5 of
So
those.
for when we got hit with COVID, it also affected our business because we deal with marketing budgets, and COVID pretty much shrunk everyone's budget. So we were like, well, what do we do right now? So we came up with an idea to create our own original content. We work with our agency partners such as Tomato Farm to craft some new concepts and some new stories. And working with them, we paired up with artists that were interested in doing that too. And therefore, here we are with Stable, one of the first of those partnerships, and we're very happy.
And it sounds like with Stable, you have a very European-like or French-like delivery, which everybody's used to. You know, you get one book a year, you know, a huge book, and there's a lot of pages, and it's worth the wait usually. Is that something that you realized you were doing, or that you approached this project like being able to do that, of having, you know, do up the 4 issues, but deliver it in one package, take a break, do up another for the second part, and then take another break, and then do the third part, you know, over the course of 3 years? Was that something did you think up front, or was it something you realized, you know, as you were in the process?
We were definitely thinking of that up front, as we knew that. So first off, as far as the artists are concerned, we work with people from everywhere. I mean, I've worked with someone in pretty much every continent except Antarctica at this point. from like a talent pool. We don't.
In Antarctica, and you're looking for work.
Get some downtime.
It's the one place, it's one continent so far we haven't worked with. But the reality there is, you know, you see. The cool thing about that is you get to see how other countries work from that standpoint. And since we've worked with a lot of agency partners that are based in Europe, that's definitely what we saw from other companies. And we were like, oh, like this would make a lot of sense. I feel like the comic space is moving towards that sort of, hey, provide more content. Like we don't necessarily need those single issues for particular stories. I know where that fits in with, you know, the giants that be DC and Marvel, but when you're a smaller company like us, it doesn't necessarily make financial sense to put out single issues for our stories. So we took that approach in mind when we were doing the Onyx originals with heavy metal.
Well, I think that's
backing off. Oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, the success that the one, if you know, of Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips' Reckless, even though that comes out, I think they deliver 2 books a year just because of their speed, but they definitely were looking at the European model. And if they wanted to slow down with Reckless and just do 1 a year, they probably would be able to get away with that easily. But I think other creators, you know, an Image and you guys are looking at, it is a very viable approach to delivering, you know, stories to people. And I think the market, you know, definitely rewarded Brubaker and Phillips. And you were saying that the first part of Stable is doing really well too.
I think what it comes down to it is, if you're doing like how we see it, we want to do like multiple drops in a year for different stories, so that it doesn't feel like we're only delivering on one and then you're waiting for us for, you know, something else out of Hero. We're going to have a bunch of different stories dropping throughout the year. So at least, you are waiting on that particular story for the next one to come out, but there'll be other content as well. So that's kind of our approach right now.
I would liken it to like the Netflix sort of streaming, like binge dump type thing, where it's like you get them all at once kind of thing. And then, you got to wait a while, but at least you can like just go in and binge on the series kind of thing. As opposed, like on a business level, Jonny hit on this. If you're Marvel and DC and you have the brand recognition, and like all of their IPs for the most part, their series and stories are extremely well known. They have a very large tuned in fan base. They will easily gobble up the next single issue that comes out. But when you're a smaller company like ours, that's sort of, you know, relatively unknown and unheard of, and we're dropping or introducing a new series to the marketplace, a new story, people aren't necessarily just going to go and get the first one if it was like a single issue, and then keep like the amount of marketing that would have to go into every single issue to keep it going and without attrition and losing readers along the way, or even trying to gain more along the way. We thought we made like kind of a business decision. We thought it would be smarter for us to sort of, okay, let's think of the price points here. We're looking at maybe $6 to $7, something like that, if it was a single issue for 20 pages for just like a small, introduction to the series versus, for like $25 or something like that, they can get a gigantic book that's like really self-contained and feels like very satisfactory or satisfying, rewarding, whatever it is. When you get to the end of it, we thought that was like a smarter move. And just so you know as well, the artists, like, we didn't get paid up front by a publishing company for this. The artists didn't either. It was sort of, it's all done with like the hope of the back end piece. So as far as timing goes, right, unlike a traditional series that would be single issue at like a Marvel or DC, where the artists and the writers are getting paid every month upon deliverable of the stuff, we couldn't get paid until afterwards. So we needed to make sure that the writing doesn't take nearly as long as the artwork for obvious reasons. So we had to kind of work around the artist's schedule as well, which is why the book took a year versus 6 months or something like that, because they need to feed themselves and pay their bills. So they're working on this out of true passion, which is also pretty cool, by the way, if you think about it, that everything that was done on this book was solely based off of passion and not dollar signs.
And because you have the schedule, it allows them to participate in something and just
because it's
be there.
It's wider. We still set a schedule. We're like, this is the goal, the target date. We always ask, you and I discussed this a little bit earlier before Jonny joined, but as part of the process, we work with the artists and say, let's set a schedule, but you tell us what works for you. Right. And it's not like, what is the most you can do per week and only working on a project? It's like, we understand you have to take on other projects to, pay your bills and stuff. What can you manage on this? And it's a big commitment, right? It's like, it's 130 something pages for the artist. Now they own a chunk of the story, which is cool. They're a co-creator in this, which is great, but they don't, they're not getting paid up front at all. They only get, and if the book tanks or something like that, and we barely get anything from it, it's a risk. But it's one that we thought we all collectively felt was worth taking. The response for the first book, Stable, has been phenomenal. It's one of heavy metal's top selling graphic novels ever. It's the first from the Hero Suite, which is pretty cool, the core 4. And we have like 4 other ones, I think, coming out in the next, calendar year. So, or even less than that.
And with something, have the time in between, you're able to sort of think about not only how do we market part 2, what were the successes and what you might be able to fine tune. And also you're able to come back, obviously, with is Winds of Numa Sera. You both have like really jump into the world building on both that series and Stable. So you're like, where are we going with the world building? Where, what it seems like having a year off allows you to really fine tune your approach on the next project and, and take advantage of what you've created previously and what you've done previously, but really, what can you bring to the next one? And of course, what can you bring to the third part too? It gives you that breathing room to really maybe analyze, I guess, for of your success, and then see how do you, build upon that.
Well, full disclosure, every series we go into, there's an exorbitant amount of planning that goes in before we even start writing a script. So like with Stable in particular, we set the stage with the world building. Okay, and then we try to plan the entire direction of the series. Like, where is this going to end? Even so, for example, like we know what happens in 2 and 3. We don't have it like outlined scene by scene yet, but overarching storylines, like what is the general themes and who are the characters we're meeting? What storylines are we following in 2 and 3? That's already been decided. So it's when you say like take a break and reassess like what resonated with certain audiences, sure, like we'll work some of that piece of it in, but we've already written, like, the script for Stable was done, I want to say like 8 months ago, and then it's in the artist's hands at that point. So we immediately pivoted. Instead of going right into 2, we just went to a different series and did the same thing, rinse and repeat for like 5 different series and then some. Plus, meanwhile, we're, now that pandemic we're out of that pretty much for the most part, at least all the heavy stuff where like businesses have reopened and marketing budgets have come back and festivals have begun, like resumed. We now have the hero sort of like custom comics that have picked back up again. So we've just been writing and creating content left and right. Everything is planned well in advance. And then once we write the scripts, it goes to the artists. And we pretty much I think the overall, Jonny, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think that the overall mentality is like, before we decide to move forward on the second book, let's see how the first book did.
We wanted to definitely get an idea of popularity on the series. We just don't jump in willy-nilly. We feel like to kind of, throw the rock in the pond and see how it ripples. So, but yeah, we do really like where Stable's going. We're investigating right now logistics around the next book. So we'll let people know when we're ready to go on that.
Like sales have definitely been good enough with this book for anyone who's wondering, like where it warrants us doing a second one, which is great because that was the first one. And I would imagine that the more that the word kind of gets out now, especially with the other ones titles we have coming out, like even with, so we can now sort of pivot over to Winds of Numa Sera. Winds of Numa Sera is a story that was not done by Hero, wasn't the core four. It was 2 of the 4, but independently. So Jonny and myself created Winds of Numa Sera, which is our dark medieval fantasy epic. And it's coming out. We published it through Dark Horse. We had an opportunity to publish it through Heavy Metal, but in speaking with Matt, who was all about it, he was like, "Yeah, I love the story. I'm going to do it." We just wanted to diversify a little bit, and instead of putting every single story we ever made through Heavy Metal, we're like, well, maybe we'll take this one and run it through Dark Horse just to kind of see if we can get that viewership over too, because it's not exactly the same fan base. And if someone over there saw it and was like, "Oh, that's really cool. Hey, what else have these guys done?" They Google it and they're like, "Oh, they got a bunch of books with heavy metal," and then it's cool with it, and vice versa. That's kind of like our hope. The level of world building that went into Winds of Numa Sera is also like unmatched. I mean, when you see this book, first of all, it's a 224-page book. It's big, and the artwork is incredible. It features artwork from Felipe Andrade, who did The Many Deaths of Layla Starr. It's got Edward Petrovich, who has done some work, I think, with X-Men and Marvel. Really gorgeous pages. The colorist Valentina Tadeo has been gobbled up since by Disney. Like we found her and we're like, "Whoa, this colors is awesome!" And you'll see the colors are absolutely incredible in the book. And we had like an original like map built character. Like we had character concept art done before it began. There's so much that went into this book. We created a religion, mythology over it. There's different sort of like cultural traditions that each region has, sigils, all that fun stuff. And then obviously the characters themselves. It's a big world, but it's a tight lens. Focuses on 3 main storylines from different parts of the kingdom. You have a child empress that's 13 years old and an orphan now, as both of her parents have died, and she's the last of her bloodline and is inheriting the kingdom when the empire is like almost on the verge of collapse. A lot of vulnerability. And then you have like this baron's daughter she could have been queen or princess or whatever, but her father had sort of like bent the knee to the empress or her father at the time. And now she doesn't even care about it. She doesn't want to be princess or queen. All she wanted to do is have the same rights as men in some cases. And she wanted to be a knight, but there's no like women allowed in the Numa Seran military or army. So now she can't be that. And she's just kind of on this mission to rebel and find her own path. And then you have Sorsha, who's like this almost like a barbarian from the south, kind of a little Viking barbarian, like, and their people have a very different mindset as to how they live. And they're all about, sort of conquering in if you can take it, it's yours kind of thing, which isn't too dissimilar from the rest of the world. But they're from the south and they're sort of fighting against Numa Sera as a whole. And he wants to change the ways of his people, but he can't because his father is the champion of their people. And in order to become champion, you have to be the best warrior. And he's not at the moment. So, that's high level stuff. But overall, the 3 storylines, they seem separate at first, and they are, but they ultimately weave together. It's called Winds of Numa Sera because winds change direction, they swirl, and it's meant to be. If you look at the cover of the book, which is pretty cool, you'll notice like our sigil, or like the emblem of the series, the logo, is like a circle with like 3 swirling winds, and then inside each wind circle is like a different storyline. They all kind of like spin together, which is cool.
With all this world building for both series, I mean, it's what makes the stories really unique, the world, and it makes it immersive. But one thing, when do you start, like, go, okay, we've done enough world building, we've even built, created a new religion for Winds. When do you go, how do we zero in, how do you keep the world building from taking over the story you want to tell? I guess maybe one question I can ask to get this going is, what comes first? Is it the world building and the idea of having a black hole next to our sun, or these kingdoms fighting for survival? Does that come first, or is there a story about an individual within those worlds that you want to tell, and then you go back and sort of really build these worlds up? What comes first? Really, in a way.
Jonny, would you say? I mean, like, I think it depends almost on like the story, what kind of story we want to tell. Because the way that it usually works with the core 4 from Hero is we'll have a creative session, and we'll just say like, hey, I kind of wanted to tell a story that follows this, like an individual. One of us will usually pitch just like a simple concept. Sometimes it's world first focused, or it's like event focused. So with Stable, it was like, hey, what happened if like a black hole just showed up outside of our sun, right? Like people have, like, we've seen black holes in space, right? Like there's no real explanation. Just kind of remembers like, well, what happened if that just kind of happened by our sun, and like what would happen? And then we just snowballed it from there, and everyone kind of pitched ideas. With Winds of Numa Sera, Jonny, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I feel like it was more, we knew we wanted to do like a story in like a medieval fantasy world, because Jonny and I have always loved that kind of just genre in general. Like, whether it's like Game of Thrones and Westeros and Essos, or if it's Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings, we just like that setting. But we didn't want to do something that had been done before. Like, we didn't want to use elves or dwarves, because we felt like those were just common. Like, we've seen that before. So
I can see where the world building needs to come in, because you just really want to break away and make something different, but that's within the genre. So,
and then from there, though, once we had the setting, then you're right. I mean, like, for me, it's always characters first. And so, like, Jonny, I remember we were talking about the child. We both like the movie Never-Ending Story, right? A lot. So I always liked the idea of this child empress, and I was like, they had the childlike empress in their story. They didn't really explore it too much or explain much of it, but she was like, why is the child in charge? And then we were like, well, what if we actually like delve into that more and created, like, think about how like the pressure of the world on a child's shoulders that has the autonomy to do everything, but she's not like a spoiled little brat here. She has no one, like her family is gone. Like in Game of Thrones, like, he had brothers and sisters, right? Joffrey, I'm talking about, and had his mom there. It's like, okay, let's remove all that and really make this character feel alone. So that's Jonny, at least for me, like where we were kind of starting with Lelia. And then
yeah, I mean, I would say for Winds in particular, and I agree with Morgan, I think depending on the story, it really delves in as far as like what we do first. It really depends on the idea. But in regards to answering your question, Francis, for Winds, I think it was definitely a world first. And the reason why it was a world first was because we needed to create logically how this world actually functions and why it does. Because one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is not having those kind of question moments when you look at a story, because everything has to be logical within the story. Like something I can't.
You have to be able to buy it. Suspend your disbelief. Okay, that
with sometimes where I don't want to be kicked out of a story because I have a question about, well, wait, that didn't make sense. Like, even if your world is based on, floating bubbles and you having to eat them to stay alive, like, you have to have a logic behind that. Like, why would someone do that? And if you have a question,
bubbles, do the bubbles like provide, is it actually like a fuel source for them? Right. That's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. So like, you can't just have a question, and you can't kind of have an aside to yourself while reading a story because you don't understand why that thing's occurring. And that's something we try to avoid at all times. And that's, I think, part of why we had to do kind of this world building process with Winds, because it could lend itself to that. And but once we had it, it also is a great tool for why characters do the things they do. It helps us make decisions in the moment when we are presented with them for our characters. Like, okay, based on where they are in their history in the world, who they are, why they're there, what would this person say? And that definitely helped in us crafting this story.
For example, like if we spend a lot of time, like we said, like kind of crafting the history of the world and the regions and the different cultures. So same way you would see like in real life, if you had like the ancient Romans, or I don't know, like the old Jerusalem, even things like that, or things that related to the Old Testament versus the New Testament and things like that, how it influences different regions and peoples, right? Who feel like they may have right over certain land and people, in some cases, slavery, how they view other people, they value life that isn't of their same, skin tone and reflect, things like that. We wanted to parallel a lot of those real, tangible, visceral elements into our story as well, but find a way to make sure it still felt like not like it has to feel fantasy, but it also has to feel familiar enough, which is a big thing. So when we laid the foundation for all the different cultures and whatnot, then it was like, okay, now who's the story we're telling? Let's pick one. Like, it can't just be like 10 different characters in this one. It's like, no, we're going to pick one from each sort of kingdom or story. And they all need to feel like they're telling a slightly different story from a different perspective, so that we're not just seeing the same thing in 3 different places.
And also what we were talking about sometime when we, at the beginning of this interview, about giving an artist a direction or an idea, instead of going, you have a free for all. By building the world, you're also creating the rules of the world, basically.
That's the biggest thing Jonny was saying. Yeah. It's like getting what's our rules.
What's the rules for not only our characters, but for us, and where we can go.
Like, does magic exist, or is it like, is that a thing in our world, or no? Or is it like, and we found we kind of landed on when the story begins, there is no magic, there is no, like, everything that's fantastical, there's no dragons or any of that. It's all sort of like myth in their world. Like, you're not sure if it existed, but the storybooks, their religion, their Bible speaks of these things called essentials and pools of essence, which is like these like sort of like fountains of youth, and you're not really sure, but they celebrate it. They have these almost like Macy's Day Parade. It's called the Walk of Ascension every single year, that like tells the story of like what its history. It's the same way like in the Bible we read about like Moses or in the Torah, and like Moses and the Red Sea and things like that, or Jesus walking on water. It's like, did that happen actually? Like, or is it a manifestation or like an interpretation of what happened? And you're kind of not sure. And same goes for like the people of New Sera. Some of them are like, yes, that actually happened. That's what the books say. And other people are like, it's an interpretation. You're not sure. But as the story unfolds and we get deeper into it, you're like, oh, this was that part of it is real. And you get to see like the real truth. Just kind of neat.
So when does Winds come out again?
June 7th.
June 7th, and it's from Dark Horse?
Yep, available everywhere books are sold. And we're talking like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart, Target.
You can pre-order it right now if it's not like it.
Yeah, you can pre-order it now.
Oh, yeah, you can. You would be able to.
Copy of the first print run, which we always say is like, you can get a first print run. It's a gorgeous book. I think it's only like $25, and it's giant, and it's a great, like a great read. At the very least, like you'll enjoy the artwork, but I think you'll appreciate the whole shebang.
And Stables is out right now, and you can get that right now. You can get that through Heavy Metal's website too, and anywhere.
Amazon. It's published through Heavy Metal, but like distributed through Simon & Schuster. So if you go to Simon & Schuster website too and just look up Stable Heavy Metal, you should find it, and you can pick any of the places you want to get it.
Is there anything else you guys like? I just got a couple more minutes. Anything else you would like to say about these two? I mean, just epic series in a way, the way, just the world building and just how epic they are?
I don't know. Maybe like if your budget's tight and you want to check out one of the two, if you're more sci-fi, go with Stable. If you're more fantasy, dark fantasy, medieval fantasy, that kind of stuff. Like if you like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, I would say lean on the side of Winds of Numa Sera. Both books are excellent. Winds is a larger book, about twice the size.
Awesome. So, hey guys, thank you very much for coming on and spending like the last 90 minutes. Jonny, I hope you're feeling better and you're finally able to escape from LA.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you, Francis. And thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome.